Carl Jung might have called the first brush with synchronicity, two inner universes tilting toward the same improbable point. You do not realize it yet, but this tiny silence is a portal. Jung spent a lifetime mapping humanity's hidden architecture, the persona you wear for approval, the shadow you hide for fear, the anima and animus that whisper of forgotten wholeness. That hush is where those layers quiver, overlapping for a heartbeat. It is where your psyche says, "Pay attention." The mind scrambles to explain it away. Maybe you misread the look. Maybe the air conditioner just clicked off. Maybe today you're absurdly sensitive to atmospheric pressure. Yet something inside you insists on meaning. That insistence is the first tremor of Eros, the ancient call to union. And so you begin to overthink. You replay every sentence, every glance reflected in cafe windows, searching for proof that the silence was shared and not a private hallucination. Jung warned that the intellect makes an excellent servant but a poor master. If you grant it dominion, it will melt the mystery down to data points until nothing luminous remains. But you are curious, almost painfully so, and you keep poking the sensation like a bruise. That is why you are here, reading words you hope will sift certainty from ambiguity. Number 1 sign, the electric stillness. It isn't a text message at 11 p.m. or a koi emoji. It's the breathless gap when your gazes lock and neither of you looks away. Not because you are daring each other to blink, but because you are startled by recognition. Jung described love at first sight as the swift collision of two projections. You cast your anima or animus upon another, and they fit the silhouette so perfectly that it feels like remembrance rather than discovery. In that electric stillness, your outer world recedes. You forget the latte going cold in your hand, the coworker waving from across the lobby, the article deadline that has stalked you all week. You become intensely aware of the other person's smallest details, the way their lower lip tucks inward when they search for a word, the half-crescent of cinnamon brown flecks inside one iris. Time dilates, and here's the crucial part. You can almost swear they are experiencing the same dilation. Your rational brain, trained by social scripts and past heartbreak, mutters that you have no evidence, yet your body collects evidence faster than thought. Synchronized breathing, mirroring posture, the faint echo of their smile curving your own lips. Jung would call this unconscious communication participation mystique, a submerged telegraph line stretching from your depths to theirs. Still you hesitate. The modern world rewards skepticism and ridicules romantic instinct. You fear misreading the static. You fear making a fool of yourself. You fear, above all, becoming vulnerable to the possibility that this is something, and therefore could be lost. That is the nexus where the psyche splits. One part aching to leap, another retreating behind reinforced logic. Yet the electric stillness has already done its clandestine work. The shadow parts of you, those banished desires, those half-forgotten hurts, sense the promise of being seen without judgment. They stir like wolves smelling dawn. The urge to remain guarded falters. Maybe that is why, later that afternoon, you let slip a confession you haven't voiced in years, a childhood dream of studying astronomy, an old melody that still haunts you, a fear of wasting your life. They don't flinch. In fact, they lean closer, eyes bright as if they, too, have a buried cosmos waiting for a witness. The dialogue swerves from weather and workplace, gossip into metaphysical terrain, why constellations mirror our mythic, craving for pattern, how nights feel lonelier when the moon is full, whether destiny is fiction or geometry in motion. The air vibrates with unspoken yeses. This is Jung's individuation process initializing itself in stereo. Each of you senses a chance to integrate fragments long scattered. Romance in Jungian terms is not merely attraction, it is psychic alchemy. Two incomplete selves approach the crucible hoping to refine gold from ordinary ore. The first hint that both are willing participants lies in this mutual suspension of triviality. You suspect it is significant, but you can't pinpoint why. So you test it, lightly, almost playfully. You mention the book you're reading, something heady about depth psychology, the hero's journey, the way myths encode collective longing. Their face sparks with recognition. They've underlined the same book, scribbled margin notes about the wounded healer archetype. The current leaps again, strong enough to sting. If you could hover above yourselves, you would see two psychic fields tugging into resonance. The persona costumes fray at the edges. Beneath them, the self glimmers raw and unguarded. That is why silence feels electric. It crackles with everything. You haven't yet dared to articulate, but somehow trust will be understood. And yet you still overthink at 3 a.m., scrolling through memory like CCTV footage. You re-examine the hush. Were their pupils dilated? Because of sunlight or sentiment? Did their laugh soften on the last syllable? Because they found you charming, or because they were being polite? You count the milliseconds between their reply and your text. You count the exclamation marks. Pause. Breathe. Jung would nudge you toward a dream journal. He would say the ego's compulsion to collect proofs is itself a child of fear. The fear that the universe might grant you something wonderful only to snatch it back. But what if the hush is already proof? What if synchronicity is the cosmos winking, telling you that internal and external worlds have momentarily aligned? When you finally close your eyes, another scene drifts up from the subconscious. You and them standing on opposite train platforms, morning sun striking the rails, both waiting for different destinations. As the trains roar in, you catch each other's gaze across the steel divide. Time slows once more, electric, reverent. You wake before discovering whether you stayed or boarded. This is not merely a dream. It is your psyche staging a rehearsal, testing how far you'll go for connection. Will you stay in the safe station of skepticism? Or will you leap the gap and trust the track beneath your feet? The question lingers at the edge of dawn. Morning brings a text from them. That conversation yesterday. Still thinking about it. Coffee later? You feel the hush bloom again inside your chest. Only now it carries an undernote of invitation. The electric stillness is evolving into motion. You could analyze the punctuation, the timing, the absence of emojis. Or you could answer with something simple and true. Yes, I'd like that. Thus the first sign completes its circuit. You both sensed the initial hush, felt its charge, and chose, not merely reacted, but chose to honor it. Analysis may still buzz at the edges, but somewhere deeper you have stepped onto Jung's spiral path, where every encounter is both mirror and map. Ahead lie 3 more signs, each demanding greater courage, thicker skin, and a willingness to face the shifting constellations within. But for now, you stand in the afterglow of sign 1, heart rattling like an untrained drum, ready to test its rhythm against another's pulse. The train doors are opening. You didn't imagine it. That message, the way their name lit up your screen, the flutter in your ribs that felt suspiciously like hope. Those were real. Not illusions stitched from loneliness or old scripts your heart likes to reread. Something is unfolding between you, delicate yet strangely rooted. A pattern begins to form, not loud, not dramatic, but insistent. You speak, they listen. They speak and you remember. The echo of one another's voices lingers long after you part. Jung wrote that the meeting of 2 personalities is like the contact of 2 chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And transformation, real transformation, is never subtle for long. It announces itself through behavior, especially when that behavior begins to defy convenience or routine. That's where the next sign emerges. Number 2. Sign, they make, and you make, excuses to stay close. You see it first in the shift of schedules. An hour that was once blocked for errands is suddenly free when you mention a walk in the park. They linger longer at your desk, on your call, in your messages, not just to chat, but to be there, as if your presence is a place worth revisiting. And you find yourself doing the same. What began as coincidence becomes choreography. It isn't desperate or clingy. It's subtle, almost artful, camouflage beneath logic. I was already going that way. Thought you might want to see this. This song made me think of you. But the pattern deepens. When they're late, they apologize. When you're quiet, they notice. The thread of attention thickens, braided from intention and curiosity. You tell yourself not to assume. You remember friends who stayed too long in false hope, who saw stars in puddles. But this feels different. not only because of what they do, but because of how you respond. You begin showing up not out of obligation, but desire. The self that once performed for validation relaxes, even begins to glow. This is the second sign, not because it confirms mutual interest, but because it signals a soft reorientation of priority. In Jungian terms, the self, capital S, begins to whisper that something in this person activates a fuller version of you. Your choices shift, not under pressure, but out of gravitational pull. At first it's in small things. You pick a movie you know they'd love, you bring a snack they once casually mentioned. You remember their dog's name, their coffee order, the fact that they hate February rain. These aren't grand gestures. They're offerings, evidence that you're paying attention. But what's more striking is that they do it too. They laugh before you finish your sentence because they already know the punchline. They quote you back to yourself, some joke or insight you thought went unnoticed. They ask about that weird work thing you mentioned offhandedly last week. This mutual mirroring is not manipulation. It's resonance. You have become psychically relevant to each other. In Jung's view, this is how the unconscious mind selects its collaborators for transformation. The self within each of you recognizes a key in the other. But here's the twist. This closeness doesn't always feel comfortable. Intimacy is a mirror, and sometimes it reflects parts of yourself you didn't realize were still fractured. You catch yourself overanalyzing again, especially when they seem distracted. You fear you've become too available. You wonder if they like you less on days when you are tired or quiet or unfunny. And still, despite the static in your mind, you show up, and so do they. That's the deeper meaning of this second sign. Beneath the sweet surface of convenience and banter, you begin to touch the sacred architecture of attachment, not in the clinging, needy way that culture warns against, but in the slow realization that you are becoming real to each other. It shows up in the way they notice your stress before you name it, in the way they say, "I thought you might need this today," and hand you something inconsequential that still lands like medicine, in the way they let you sit in silence without trying to fill it. These aren't favors, they're investments. Jung might say your inner archetypes are beginning to form a bridge. The part of you that longs to be nurtured recognizes the caregiver in them. The part of them that craves authenticity senses your truth teller. These archetypal bonds transcend small talk and start forming the outline of trust. And trust, once it arrives, brings with it an eerie calm. You stop obsessing over replies. You don't need a signal every day. You start living in the space between interactions without collapsing into panic. Your nervous system begins to relax in their presence, perhaps for the first time in a long while. There's a night where you both stay longer than you meant to. The room dims without your noticing. The conversation tilts toward vulnerability again. Not dramatic oversharing, but gentle uncovering. You admit you're afraid of disappointing people. They say they used to feel invisible in relationships. Neither of you tries to fix it. You just let the truth sit between you like a candle. That night you fall asleep not with answers, but with the sensation of being held, even from a distance. If you look closely, you'll see how different this feels from projection. You're not creating a fantasy version of them. You're actually seeing them, and they are seeing you. Not perfectly, not completely, but clearly enough to matter. That's why they're still around. That's why you are. The second sign is not love yet, but it is devotion to possibility. It is the subtle but persistent ways in which two people rearrange their lives, ever so slightly to make space for each other. Not out of duty, not out of fear, but because something deep within says, "Here, this one. Let's find out." And in that act of showing up, of crafting excuses that are really invitations, you both begin to answer the call of Jung's most daring idea that true intimacy is not about becoming one, but about becoming more yourself in the presence of another. So you show up again, and so do they. The excuses fall away. What remains is presence. Ahead, there is still uncertainty, still risk, but also a pulse is rising. A momentum is forming. The pattern is no longer isolated signs. It's a rhythm. A movement towards something neither of you can name, but both of you feel. You used to second-guess the quiet. Now you lean into it. The spark is no longer just a flicker. It's heat now. Warmth. Not the fever of obsession or the drama of fantasy, but something steadier, an ember beneath daily life, glowing even when you're apart. You still feel the rush when their name appears on your screen, but it's tempered now by something deeper. Recognition. You know this person. Or, more hauntingly, you feel that they know you. Carl Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation isn't painless. You've made space for each other, yes. You've built a ritual of showing up, of leaning in. But now comes the part your ego didn't expect. The confrontation with your own reflection, thrown back at you not in malice, but in intimacy. It begins when they see something in you that you haven't yet admitted to yourself. Maybe they call you brave in a moment when you feel like a coward. Maybe they laugh at something you've always hidden because you thought it made you strange. Maybe they ask a question so precise, so piercing, that your usual armor doesn't have time to lock into place. This is the third sign. And it's not gentle. Number 3, sign. There's flirting but also friction. And you both stay. This is the stage most mistake for trouble. It's when the initial idealization begins to tremble. They say something that rubs against you the wrong way. You reveal a wound they didn't know how to hold. Maybe they're late. Maybe you're distant. Maybe nothing big happens at all, just a subtle shift, a misstep in the dance. And yet neither of you bolts. This, more than electricity or timing or attention, is the most intimate moment yet. The moment you see each other not as ideas, but as flawed, unpredictable, stubborn, sensitive, complex human beings. And something remarkable happens. You choose to stay engaged. Jung called this the dissolution of projection. In the beginning, you both saw each other through the gauze of the anima and animus, the inner contrasexual images your unconscious painted long before you met. But now the gauze is thinning. You no longer fall for the idea of them. You begin to fall for the reality, the difficult, contradictory, breathtaking truth of who they are. They tease you, and you're not sure if it's affection or deflection. You challenge them, and they bristle. But instead of withdrawing into silence, you talk. You stay in the room. You ask harder questions. You apologize with depth. You fight fair. The flirting becomes layered now. No longer just banter, but play woven with emotional risk. And the friction, it becomes sacred. In Jung's alchemical model of love, friction is not failure. It's the fire that purifies. It burns away illusion. It forces honesty. Not cruel honesty, but the kind that says, I see your shadow, and I'm still here. You test this in moments you don't plan. Maybe you're tired and snappish, and instead of recoiling, they say, rough day? Not in judgment, in invitation. Or maybe they say something that lands wrong, and instead of bottling it, you ask, what did you mean by that? And the conversation deepens. You're no longer afraid to name the tension. That's how you know this isn't just infatuation. You are both building the courage to hold each other without distorting the image. And sometimes, holding each other means not saying the perfect thing. Sometimes it means sitting in discomfort and not reaching for immediate resolution. This is where most modern stories end or collapse, because it's here that love stops being a feeling and starts becoming a process, a forging, a long look in the mirror, where you begin to see your own patterns reflected, back with clarity you never invited. You begin to notice your impatience when you feel unheard, your instinct to retreat when someone gets too close, your habit of downplaying your needs to seem chill, not because they're accusing you, but because something about their presence sharpens your awareness of who you are and who you've been pretending to be. And then this, they don't flinch when you admit it. That's the friction as flirtation. The heat beneath your shared vulnerability becomes magnetic. It's not the same flirtation as the beginning. It's richer, slower, heavier with possibility. You're not just seducing anymore. You're inviting. You're not just charming each other. You're challenging each other to stay awake. And you both do. You start talking about things you never meant to bring up. So soon, childhood memories, fears you usually keep wrapped in irony, your relationships with your parents, Your dreams that still embarrass you a little. Not to trauma dump, not to fast-track intimacy, but because something in them makes you want to be known. And you find yourself wanting to know them, not just the surface. You're listening differently now. You're hearing the pauses in their stories, not just the words. You notice when their eyes drift while they're talking, and you want to follow that gaze and ask, where did you just go? This is no longer about liking each other. This is about meeting each other fully, and every time you survive a tiny rupture together, every time the friction doesn't push you apart, it pulls you closer, not in fantasy, in truth. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the conjunctio, the mystical union of opposites. It's not a merging of identities. It's the decision to remain distinctly yourself in the presence of another who is also whole. And suddenly the overthinking quiets. Not completely, not forever, but you find yourself less interested in dissecting their every word and more interested in simply being with them. The need to control the outcome loosens. The urge to perform fades. You're no longer trying to win them. You're trying to understand them. And in doing so, you begin to understand yourself. So yes, there's still flirting. Still glances across the room that make you flush. Still the ache when their hand brushes yours. But now it's not just chemistry. It's communion. Friction used to terrify you. Now it's the evidence of presence, of effort, of the sacred mess that connection demands. You have shed the mask. And when you look over, so have they. You don't always agree. You don't always align, but you see each other. And neither of you looks away. Morning spills through the curtains, and for once the light feels less interrogative, more like a benediction. You reach for your phone and find an unread message. Not urgent, not demanding, simply, hope you woke up smiling. I'll call after my meeting. There's no rush in the words, no clause. Yet they tug at you with unmistakable gravity. You reply without drafting 3 different versions first. The ease surprises you, until you remember how far you've traveled. From electricity, to excuses, to friction, to this, an almost domestic hush of mutual presence. Carl Jung called the final movement of relationship the return to the self, the stage where projection is dissolved, and 2 individuated beings orbit one another in conscious alliance. You feel that orbit now, not spinning out of control, but holding like moons held steady by invisible mathematics. What you sense in your chest is not infatuation, it's alignment. Number 4, sign. You both rearrange the constellations. You notice it first in calendars. The standing Sunday call with an old friend slides to Saturday, because Sunday is now your hiking day together. They, who once lived in perpetual overtime, begin blocking out evenings with the single word us. No negotiations, no dramatic proclamations, just the quiet editing of life to include each other as a constant. People see priority in grand gestures, airport races, surprise proposals, but you discover its subtler dialect. They remember to grab your lactose-free creamer. You learn the ringtone of their mother's evening check-in and give them the room. They invite you to the hard things. A dental surgery pickup, a memorial, the first therapy session after years of avoidance. You show up, not because you feel obligated, but because their orbit now defines part of your sky. There's a Saturday when rain thrums the gutters and your plans collapse. Instead of scrambling for alternative entertainment, you end up in the kitchen chopping vegetables side by side. Marvin Gaye pulsing low, silence breathing like a third presence. It should be mundane. Instead, it feels cathedral. Time stretches, but not the dizzy dilation of beginning. More like deep ocean, slow and pressurized. Everything held together by weight rather than speed. You taste the sauce, find it needs salt. They're already holding the shaker. The choreography is unspoken. Jung might say the unconscious has synchronized rhythms. Myth might call it the dance of sacred twins. Whatever the language, the result is the same. You no longer hover at the edges of one another's day, hoping for an opening. You are the opening. And when conflict appears, as it must, as it should, you both protect the we from the heat of the I. You still argue. You argue better. You say, I'm too flooded to talk right now, but I'm not leaving. They reply, take the time you need. I'm here when you're ready. The tension arcs, then subsides, leaving rings in the air like ripples after stone. You don't celebrate these moments on social media. They feel too inward, too precise. Besides, the validation you once scavenged online has been replaced by something sturdier. The lived memory that when things got messy, neither of you chose the exit. Priority reveals itself in endurance. In dreams, new symbols arrive. You stand beside them at a compass rose, each of you pointing a different direction, yet the arrows glow and fuse into a single path. Another night you watch yourselves as figures in stained glass, distinct panes, same window. You wake neither triumphant nor confused, only calm, as if the psyche is finally convinced that partnership need not threaten autonomy. On Wednesday, you cancel a late work meeting, the first time you've ever done so, because their art exhibit opens at 6, and you want to watch their face when the lights dim over the first piece. The client doesn't fire you. The world doesn't implode. Instead, you receive an unexpected compliment from your manager the next day, as if the universe is rewarding the integrity of your choice. That evening, they bring you tea before you ask. They've memorized the cup you prefer, the precise lagoon of milk that tempers bitterness. It isn't service, it's symphony. You think about how many years you spent proving independence, mistaking isolation for strength. Now you realize strength is not the fortress, but the bridge. Priority shifts your metaphors. Love is less a wildfire, more a hearth. It still burns, but you feed it with small logs, shared chores, folded laundry, the ritual of checking that the other arrived home safe. You catch yourself smiling at their toothbrush next to yours, and rather than panic at lost freedom, you feel the odd sensation of being found. Your friends notice. One says you're lighter, another quieter. You laugh. Never has your life been fuller of responsibility, and yet the weight feels redistributed, balanced across two sets of shoulders. Even solitude changes flavor. When you're alone, you no longer spiral through what-ifs. You rest within the knowledge that someone in the city thinks of you as their chosen coordinate. Jung wrote about the transcendent function, the psychic operation that unites opposing forces into a new whole. You and they remain separate, yes, but together you generate a third thing neither could have birthed alone: a field, an atmosphere, a home that travels wherever you both go. One night under late summer stars you say, "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop." They answer, "Shoes will always drop, that's gravity." The question is, do we pick them up together? You stare at each other, absurdly moved by the prosaic image of two people stooping to rescue footwear from the inevitable pull of the earth. It's the most romantic thing you've ever heard. The loop you opened when you first felt that electric hush, it closes here. Not with climax, but with cadence. You no longer need to replay every word. The evidence has accumulated in ordinary days. The unpaid caregiver, the relinquished overtime, the sauce salted in sync, the argument survived, the dreams of fused arrows. Overthinking dissolves in the acid of reality. You recognize that certainty is impossible, but commitment, apparently, is not. Commitment is dozens of minor verdicts rendered in favor of us, until the ledger weighs undeniably toward love. And yes, the word has finally appeared, not shouted with trumpets, but whispered while tying each other's aprons. Love. Not the abstract love that drenched your teenage notebooks, nor the star-crossed love that fueled your 20s late-night playlists, but mature love. Love means becoming the place the other can rest. As Jung might have said had he set foot in your kitchen tonight. You dry the last dish, they turn off the music. The rain has stopped. Outside, streetlights paint wet asphalt gold. There is nothing dramatic to announce. No fireworks to punctuate the evening. Just two people standing side by side, knowing tomorrow will ask again where priorities lie, and feeling ready to answer together. You watch them slip on their coat, notice the weary slump of long hours, and realize you're rearranging your own morning to bring them breakfast. Not because romance manuals told you to, not because you're afraid they'll leave, but because their well-being has become a line in your personal constitution. Priority, then, is the simplest sign and the hardest one. I choose you in the small, the dull, the difficult. You choose me back. The electric stillness that started it all hums softly in the background. No longer a question but a bass line. The root note under every melody you improvise together. You smile, finally trusting the music enough to stop counting beats. Outside, the city breathes. Inside, the hearth holds. And somewhere deep in your psyche, the self nods. Satisfied, individuation continues, now in duet.